Well, thanks everyone for joining today for our session on delivering a unified cross-program view of the client. I'm Eric Clark, a technical program manager for Spring ML. And in this session today, we're going to cover some background on what Utah needed to do to improve social services, the things that we needed to do to plan and coordinate to meet that need, and then what Spring ML and Google delivered from a technical standpoint. And we'll also share a bit about the outcomes and lessons learned from our project. So to get us started today, I'm excited to introduce you to Rachel Stone, Chief Data Officer of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Stone with the Utah Governor's Office of Management and Budget. I'm really happy to be with you here today. For several years, this office and Utah's social services cabinet agencies have been working together to improve outcomes for clients. Our office went deep into this mission with programs like Child and Family Services, Juvenile Justice, and the Department of Corrections to transform how work was conducted so that the right services could be delivered in the right amount to clients at the right time when they needed it. However, while individual programs saw major improvements from these changes, this was not enough for many clients. At any given point in time in Utah, thousands of clients are engaged concurrently with two or more programs. And you can imagine this. Concurrent enrollment means multiple siloed caseworkers, case plans, expectations, consequences. So even though each group is trying really hard and individually improving to help clients, clients can still easily get bogged down in such a way where too much help actually backfires. So, with some study of this situation, we became very aware of the fact that the onus was on the state. We needed to get ourselves together if we wanted our clients to do likewise. So, early last year, we got started on a solution to cut through bureaucracy and overcome those siloed workers and their separate software. In just less than a year, we designed and built and implemented this solution, much in thanks to the work of Eric and his team at Spring ML. And the solution that we built centered on the philosophy that helping those case managers better serve their clients would better produce outcomes for the clients that we wanted to see, that they wanted to see. So, whatever services a client needs to receive, our intent was to help case managers deliver those right services in the right amount at the right time. And although that's a pretty simple concept, delivering on this in reality is pretty difficult. And it can be difficult for a case manager to know of all the people on my hefty caseload, who do I need to help today? Who needs my attention right now at any given time? So we help case managers focus on those critical activities of the client by presenting a unified vision of their progress, their milestones, anything that's going on for them in terms of their plan from across programs.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. So, to kind of transition to what the solution is and what we needed to do to make this happen, the promise of this project to provide that single view of the client is a really lofty goal. It's a really complex problem, requires a ton of planning and coordination across different agency lines. And one of the things that we knew that we needed to do to be successful here would be around data sharing. I mean, without that, none of this is possible. So, and the other thing is this type of data is just, it's very sensitive and it's heavily guarded and it needs to be. So we needed to really spend time to think very deeply about how we would build a system that didn't compromise anyone's data. And it was actually much more of a functional challenge in that way than a technical one. Getting everybody on the same page with how this would work and we keep everybody's data private, building that vision, which Rachel did a fantastic job across agency lines about what the end solution could mean for caseworkers and clients was key. And also that careful planning around how we were going to share data securely was also key. So we needed to build those relationships across agency lines and get everybody on the same page from each program. That was able to really pave the way for a success here. Secondly, we also knew to get this right, we have to provide those case managers with the situational awareness that Rachel was just mentioning. They need to see their clients' milestones from other programs, not just their own. So that is incredible context to provide to them, and they can't get it today without a lot of kind of manual effort and work on their part. So that meant that we needed to spend a lot of time with those caseworkers up front, just listening to their needs, understanding what their struggles are, and just making sure that we're mapping the solution that's going to give them the most value right out of the gate and quickly. And then thirdly, delivering on this promise, um, it really meant that we couldn't bite off more than we could chew. This vision of that single client view is something that many people have attempted, and I think um, the scope could just grow very quickly here because it's a lofty goal, it's important. But what we decided to do is create a really laser focus on answering these two key questions that we heard from feedback from caseworkers. And that is, if I'm a case manager, I'm asking, is my client engaged with another program? And if the answer to that is yes, then I need to know what the contact information is for those other case managers so I can learn more about what's going on and begin coordinating services together. But at the end of the day, having that focus was something that we could measure. Um, and we knew that if we could do that, it would provide huge value right away to caseworkers. But it also really just insulated us from trying to do too much at once. And now that we have people using the system and seeing the value, that the next phases are already in the works to build on top of those two key questions. So I want to transition now to the next slide and talk about how we built this on Google Cloud. From a technology standpoint, there are just 4 key components to this, and they're all built on GCP. First is we built automated data pipelines to pull data from the various case management systems into BigQuery. And it's a variety of data pipelines in this case. There's no one size fits all. We're pulling from multiple disparate systems. So in some cases, that meant that we wanted to work with an agency that wanted to push their data to us kind of on their own schedule. So that's like a flat file coming into a landing zone in Google Cloud Storage that we then ingest to BigQuery. And another pipeline, connects directly to the data source itself and connects to a view specifically. And in that case, we're using products like Cloud Composer for the scheduling and orchestration, and data flow to handle the ingestion and transformations. But at the end of the day, everything happens with as much automation as possible. Secondly was the person matching model. And this can be really tough because when you're talking about getting data from multiple sources, and especially data about people that are being maintained by different agencies, it can be hard to match the same person across the different databases. There could be typos, or people can change names, and sometimes in certain cases clients actually purposely providing incorrect information about themselves. All of those things create issues when you're trying to match people. So what we did is, after we consolidated the data into BigQuery, we applied or created and applied some matching algorithms that then assign some scoring to determine if it's either an exact match or if it's just a probabilistic match, and kind of what that overall score is. And then we show those matches to, or potential matches, to case managers, and then they can then verify it with the other case managers. Third component here was an API to access this consolidated data inside of BigQuery. And the intent for this API is that we want each social service program at some point here in the future to use this API so that they can integrate this data directly into the existing case management systems that their caseworkers are already using and familiar with. And we also built this whole solution with a zero trust security principle in mind. So that means that even though we have only state internal resources accessing this, every user has to be verified. And then once they're in, they can only see the data that they have permission to see. So that meant that we integrated with the state's existing identity platform. We used tight IAM controls within GCP and enabled auditing and logging features. So every time a user logs in or there's a system generated action against this data, that's all logged, it's monitored, and we retain that information indefinitely. And then fourth, and last but not least, for phase one, and we were moving quickly, and we wanted to provide that value quickly. So we developed a custom front end, a web app that's hosted on App Engine. And the intent of this application is to give caseworkers access to the match data right now, because agency programs are likely not going to use our API to modify their existing systems quickly. So we wanted to provide this data to them now. So now they can log in and review their matches. They can see the potential overlaps with other programs where their clients might be involved with other agency programs. And then they can even see Gantt charts showing their clients' milestones across other social services. So it's a really cool solution, all built on GCP, but I wanted to just kind of talk on the other end, not technical, but what does this mean in business terms? When we build a system, or architected actually at that point, we're looking at things and we're trying to use as many managed services within GCP as possible. And that really gives us three key differentiators or components here. First is scaling. That means that we can only use what we really need in this system. And in some cases, that actually means scaling down to zero. So nothing in this environment is over provisioned. Everything is tuned. It's ready to go for us. And we don't have to pay for the infrastructure in advance or upfront, and it kind of scales with us. Second is low maintenance. So most of that underlying infrastructure on this pretty complex system that's been built is actually something that Google handles for us. They manage the infrastructure of BigQuery and tools like Cloud Composer and things like that. So what that means is for us and Rachel's team, we can focus on the application. We can focus on the insights that we need to get out of this data that we're bringing in. And we don't have to worry about the infrastructure. And then thirdly, using managed services means high performance when we need it. So at this point, we're expecting the system to grow. We're already getting great feedback from people that are using it, asking us, when can we bring on more social services into this platform? So we're future-proofed in that way. We don't have any constraints in terms of performance or being able to meet that demand as it grows. So really cool solution, and really honored to be a part of this project with Rachel. At this point, I'm going to hand it back to Rachel, and she's going to talk to us about outcomes and lessons learned.
Thanks, Eric. Um, so to exactly Eric's point, one of the first pieces of feedback when we went live with the solution 3 months ago was, when is this other program going to be part of this? And how about this other program over here? And we were really happy to hear that. This is an interoperability tool, and so the more programs, the merrier. Um, but I think it was important, and that's why I want to share these particular lessons here. It was very important that we started small. Something with such sensitive data like this project surrounding social services, people who are criminal justice involved, um, uh, it took a decent amount of buy-in from the leaders and the workers on the ground at these programs to say, we're going to do this and this is how it's going to work, even though it was a good idea. So I recommend to others embarking on this path that they also start small and prove a concept and scale from there. We also really needed some good sponsorship, and that came from our office, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. And part of that was driven by the fact that social services and taking care of our criminal justice organizations is an expensive operation. And so we have a natural incentive to get the outcomes that we need for a very callous purpose. In reality, though, these are people's lives, and these outcomes ought to be pursued no matter the reason. But we needed a really good sponsor to bring these groups together because they are siloed and they are all incentivized by their own outcomes and methods. And so we needed a strong quarterback to bring those groups together. Legal barriers is something that we heard from day in and day out that we'd never be able to overcome, but they can be. there's potential in every state and federal regulation around data to use an exception, especially when there is client consent. And so we did build consent into the model that we have for this project. And last, scalability. This was immensely important. There are so many organizations that serve our vulnerable populations here in Utah and anywhere. And it was really important for us, like I said, to start small and then imagine who would be the most helpful to fold in next. And so we really needed this to be plug and play and not be hindered by worrying about things like licenses or capacity planning. We didn't provision any tech that we weren't yet using, yet we had the capacity to grow at any pace we wanted to, unencumbered by those sorts of constraints. And so that was one of the winning features for us with Google Cloud Platform, was the ability to scale, and I would recommend that to anyone else embarking on this project. So we appreciate you joining us for this session about bringing together a unified vision of the client. Our contact information is here on this slide. If you want to get in touch with us, we're happy to go over the nitty-gritty details of how this came together. But thank you for joining. Thank you, Eric. Eric, if you have any last words.
No, I just want to say thank you to you, Rachel. It was a fantastic project, and I really appreciate everybody watching today. Thanks very much.
Hello and welcome to our live Q&A session for this impactful social services project. My name is Channing Quist. I'm a Google Cloud Account Executive for the state of Utah and Nevada. I'll be the host and moderator for this session. I want to first and foremost welcome Rachel Stone from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. Rachel, good morning.
Good morning.
I'd also like to introduce Eric Clark, who is our project manager for SpringML, and also a Google Premier Partner. Welcome.
Thanks, Channing. Good morning, everyone.
All right, looks like we've got questions queuing up right now. And Eric, it looks like the first one is for you. So from a technical perspective, how were you able to simplify the deployment of this solution leveraging Google tools in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, that's a great question. I can tell you one thing, the pandemic was never in the project plan. So when that happened, everything sort of changed and the world stopped to a certain degree in the moment. But this project in particular had so many different components to it. It wasn't just about building connections into existing data sources, right? That was kind of the foundational piece. There was also creating a person matching model, building an API, having a user interface built that folks can use to access this data and start to use it right away. And even a security model as well to ensure that only the right people have access to the data since it's highly sensitive. So it's a large and complex project to start with. So I think the key here to really simplify the deployment and that timeline, especially in the midst of a pandemic, was having the ability to start and think from the ground up, right? This was a new build in GCP. So we could think from the start, how are we going to build this from the ground up? And one of the key decisions that we made at first was to leverage as many managed services as possible. And what that really enabled us to do is to focus on the end user and the functionality that they needed really quickly. It also now allowed us to have just extreme flexibility and make adjustments along the way. So we met with folks, that would be using the system frequently throughout the development cycle, continually getting that feedback so we can make these micro adjustments around the way. But again, the decision to prefer managed services allowed us to abstract away a lot of that, worry about the infrastructure and the scaling component, because we knew if we just plugged into those things, we could really start to create value right away. So, we had just so everyone's aware, we had about a 2-month planning session that occurred in late 2019 to kind of prep for this and think through deeply the solution and its architecture and plan for it. And then we were able to get through about a 4-month deployment cycle, which was actually ahead of time, even in the midst of COVID. So huge kudos to the team and Rachel's team to come together and actually do this in the midst of the pandemic.
Thanks, Eric. Great answers. And I was a part of those initial meetings, right, with 5 different agencies all getting aligned. It's a difficult task ahead for sure. So Rachel, the next question looks like it's for you. What was the timeline to a production instance for this project?
Right. So that's a great question. And Eric talked about the timeline a little bit there. If I am, helping bring context to the full timeline that we really had around this project as a whole, beyond just the technology, because in all reality, the technology, thanks to Google Cloud and Eric's team at SpringML, the technology was the easy part. So our timeline started about May of last year. May 2019, we had an initial meeting with agency heads of these social service cabinet agencies saying, hey, this is what we've done so far to improve social services, and we'd like to work with you guys to integrate on top of all those improvements. And so that was May of 2019. We started having some meetings after that to bring together a loose sense of the vision, and that got firmer and firmer over time. We brought in SpringML, I think in the fall of 2019, to do that technical planning, and that was so important to get the technical planning done in order to get all that buy-in that we needed. Because even though it was a decent idea, we should unify our social services and give a unified view of the client, it did take a decent amount of buy-in, and there was also the legal component. There was this chicken and egg of how can we guarantee that we're going to have good data security so that the lawyers will sign off on being able to share our data? So we really needed to provide a good technical plan. That really helped with the buy-in and the legal components of this. And then we worked with SpringML throughout the spring and summer of 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, and had a live production product in August of this year, and the caseworkers have been using it ever since.
All right, that's a great segue. The next question is specifically for you still, Rachel. It looks like, is the major program benefit to target caseworker communication with other caseworkers?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's absolutely a huge part of our goal. We have a very operational mindset here at the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. Operational excellence is the language we speak, and for us, that means that the frontline worker needs the tools to get their job done. And so when we talked with a lot of these frontline workers, something that they were saying is it's really hard to reach out to know who the other caseworkers are serving that client. So our first goal was to answer a simple question: is anyone working with this client? And if so, who is that? So I can start a conversation. And then we can also share information to answer questions like, okay, what are they working on right now?
Excellent. So still along that same vein, and maybe this is for you, Eric, but the question is around, how does the person matching problem really get solved, right? I know there's fuzzy person matching, which was a difficult task. That's a great question.
Yeah, and it's a challenge because if you're taking person data from multiple systems, it's it's different between system and agency. So you have to kind of start to understand the nuances of each data source and figure out what how you can make those fuzzy matches. We started with a simple algorithm that does some really basic scoring, even though it's kind of a complex problem to solve. Right, we started with a scoring mechanism that uses key parts of like a date of birth or last name, social security number, key pieces of information to make a score. And then what we want to do is surface those potential matches in the UI or via the API that agencies can then plug into their own case management systems. Surface those possible matches that are high enough on the list and prompt the caseworkers to go and reach out and start coordinating service. Confirm the match first and then coordinate service if it's a match. And we've seen a lot of success so far to that degree.
Excellent. I'm sure there'll be more questions around that. So the next question is, what challenges did you encounter establishing a data governance? Maybe that's for Rachel.
Yeah, I can start off, and then Eric, there's also a huge technical component of that. So with data governance, I mean, the first thing I would say is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good and the good enough. And again, with our operational mindset, we really view data as an operational asset. And the thing about siloed systems is that one group's data over here might look the same as a group's data over here, but is interpreted totally differently. And data has significance and meaning, and there's a lot of interpretation that might be lost maybe in translation. So information sharing, really created a new frontier for these programs, having to understand each other and talk to each other. So we have ongoing weekly meetings with the program administrators. We have feedback loops with the caseworkers to help us determine what data ought to be displayed, some security controls around that, how to start conversations based on data. And so we have some great working groups really closely following the data to make sure of it. And then there's a lot of technical components to back that up as well, make sure we don't lose things through the cracks. And Eric can speak to that.
Yeah, that's always a big question, right? This is protected data. This is sensitive data. It needs to be treated as such. That's why we spent so much time as part of the project in the planning phase to think about those things and plan for their security and build the support within other program leadership so they understood what the plan was to keep data private and secured. So the way that we can do that in GCP is we can leverage services within there and trust that their infrastructure is secured. When the data is moving, it's encrypted in transit and at rest. We have data sovereignty in place. We also integrated with Utah's identity platform. So in this zero trust model that I mentioned in the presentation, right, you have to be authenticated, and then when you're in there, you're only going to see what you actually should be seeing. So we have filters all the way down to the database level to make sure that people are only seeing the records that they need to see. And beyond that, we have full auditing that we're keeping and retaining logs indefinitely, so we know who's accessing what data, what are they doing with it, when did they do it, and so we have full traceability of all of that within our Google Cloud platform.
Excellent. So the next question is, hi guys, was there anything specific in GCP that could not easily get you could not easily get from AWS or Azure?
Well, I'll take that. I'm a fan of multi-cloud, and look, Google with Anthos and the moves that they're making in the multi-cloud space is really impressive, and they're really a leader there. There's one thing that comes to mind. I'm a really big fan of BigQuery. It's a very differentiated solution, and it's kind of at the heart of what we did here to enable such scale and to enable even the person matching, right, and ingesting data in there and doing quick analytics on that data, quick matching, surfacing the data to the end user. From a performance and cost perspective, it's no match. That's one really key differentiator that I can think of.
Thank you. So the next question is for Rachel. It looks like, how did Utah approach funding for this project, specifically as it relates to agency buy-in?
So I think that is an excellent question. And I'll speak to a couple of things. I mean, funding and buy-in, both related and separate. So with funding, we had some legislative funding that was allocated a few years back to, it specifically said in the intent language that we needed to integrate data to serve vulnerable populations. And it mentioned some groups that ought to be worked with. And we were able to touch on some of those groups, but we have room to grow. As he said in the presentation, our key to getting here was by scaling and starting small and scaling from there. And so we are still in the process of onboarding groups to meet that intent language, but we did have about $1 million total in funding to tackle this. Thankfully, Google was able to meet us with our budget. And I still haven't quite spent all of that. A surprising amount of that actually went to the lawyers to make the legal parts of this work. And then other things that really influenced buy-in, I do work in the budget office, and that is a component of our leverage. But it was also about making a clear case for the clients. We had a good story to tell. We showed that there was a case for operational improvement to help their workers out, and that's a big deal. And these are high turnover environments where these workers work, and so to help them out in any way is important.
Excellent. All right, this will be the last question. Just a reminder, all additional questions will be answered and addressed in our Q&A forum over the next 24 hours, so feel free to keep asking questions. We only have a limited amount of time here, but we've got one last question here, and it's essentially around the sponsorship. How is the approach to be able to get champions to help you, Rachel?
I joke all the time that the title Chief Data Officer really should be Chief Diplomacy Officer, because that's what the job is really about, is trying to make people who don't normally work together, and data is just the means to that end often. We had the sponsorship of, at the time it was Kristen Cox, the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. She really oversees the state operations in her role, and she had great relationships with the agency heads and the programs. We'd worked with them already to improve their operations, so they were familiar with working with us. And so we were really, really lucky to have those established relationships. But it was so important to make sure that everyone involved in this felt included. We did a newsletter every month to inform everybody about this project. It's still going, it was still real, just to let them know that we were making progress. Anybody from program managers to public information officers to technical folks working for the state, so they'd stay informed.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending this session, and please stay tuned for additional sessions. Rachel and Eric, thank you so much for your hard work on this project, and looking forward to many more successful ventures together.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.